What's going on, everybody? It's your girl, Dayna Patreace, aka the Black Fairy. And you are here with me now. We are going to be discussing chapter 3, When God Was a Woman, by Merlin Stone. Okay. We'll be entering and journeying into chapter 3. But before we do, I'm just going to play the intro and we will get right back to it.
Yes. I fall in love with myself, and I want someone to share it with me. I want someone to share me with me.
All right. So, as I said, we are getting into chapter 3 of When God Was a Woman. Where women, well, blah, blah, blah. Where woman was deified is the name of the chapter. It's chapter 3. It's a bit of a longer chapter. I am gonna be using the audiobook. At chapter 1, I tried to read on my own, and it's not to say that I'm, illiterate, but it's just that a lot of the anthropology terms were very hard to say, right? To pronounce. So I found the audiobook, which I feel like was just like a gift from spirit, because when I had actually looked for it before and I could not find it, which is how I ended up buying the book. So I ended up buying the book, but when that happened and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to sound, it can be irritating to hear someone like struggle through certain words, and I checked Audible again and there it was. And I was like, oh my gosh. Right? So I bought it on Audible and we'll be listening to it. And as we listen to it, I will be stopping and playing. I'm going to be giving my thoughts in regards to what it is that we are reading. So that's the read and review, right? So don't be annoyed. It's not just a read through. In fact, I don't think I can actually do that, right? It's a copywritten book, but with the fact that we are stopping in between and discussing, it makes it a bit different. So yeah, we are going to get into it. I'm excited. I know that this video, like this series, has been getting a lot of views. I've had a couple people, say, thank you for doing this. And I appreciate y'all because I am really on this journey of deconstructing patriarchy. And not a lot of women that I'm around in everyday life are necessarily interested in doing the same. So to find, a little bit of my tribe in this regard online has been a blessing. And I hope you guys will, comment below and let me know your thoughts as well as we continue to read through this book. It's definitely getting interesting. Like I said, chapter 3 is, it's a bit of, like, what did I want to say? I don't know. It's a bit, hold on. How come it looks like this time? But it's not. Just give me a second, y'all. I'm still getting used to this, but I'm going to leave it. I don't have time to figure it out. Last time, I think it was more up front, but it's all good. So we are going to, again, read and review this chapter 3. And yeah, this chapter is a little bit long, right? It's actually 1 hour and 10 minutes and 58 seconds. I'm going to put it on 1.2 speed. hopefully it'll make it a little bit better, especially because I'm stopping and reviewing. But I think if you're invested in reading this book and hearing my thoughts on this book and even just contributing your own thoughts, you won't mind. But I am going to make it just a little bit faster. We'll see how it sounds. I haven't tested it out or anything like that. I just noticed prior to recording that it's like, I was like, oh, it's an hour? I was like, damn. And I'm already like, I try not to let my videos go more than an hour, but it is what it is. And I am truly, sorry, I want to be in more of the frame. I'm truly enjoying this book. And I'm learning a lot. So we're going to see how it sounds. If it doesn't sound too bad, I'm just going to go back to the regular, speed. But yeah, let's see. So chapter 3, let's get into it.
3. Women, where woman was deified. The question most pressing, perhaps the one that has most insistently caused this book to come into being, is this. What effect did the worship of the female deity actually have upon the status of women in the cultures in which she was extolled? Hinz, Evans, Langdon, and many others have referred to the ancient goddess-worshipping societies as matriarchal. Exactly what does this imply? It would be easy to enter into a seesaw type of reasoning here. That is to say, they worshipped a goddess. Therefore, women must have held a high status. Or because women held a high status, therefore a goddess was worshipped. Though these two factors, if we judge by the attitudes of the societies that worship the male deities of today, may have been closely related. Yet various views on the subject should be considered, even those in which cause and effect appear to be confused, or simultaneous events are perceived as linear. What we want to achieve is as comprehensive an understanding as possible of the relationship of the female religion to the position of women. In The Dominant Sex, M. and M. Warting, writing in Germany in 1923, asserted that the sex of the deity was determined by the sex of those who were in power. The ruling sex, having the power to diffuse its own outlooks, tends to generalize its specific ideology. Should the trends of the subordinate sex run counter, they are likely to be suppressed all the more forcibly in proportion as the dominant sex is more overwhelming. The result is that the hegemony of male deities is usually associated with the dominance of men, and the hegemony of female deities with the dominance of women. Sir James Frazer believed that the high status of women was initially responsible for the veneration and esteem of the female deity. He cited the Pulu clan of Micronesia, where the women were considered to be socially and politically superior to the men. This preference for goddesses over gods, he wrote, in the clan of the Pulu Islanders has been explained, no doubt rightly, by the high importance of women in the social system of the people. Robertson Smith connected the choice of the sex of the supreme deity to the position of dominance of the male or female within the family. He suggested that as a result of the kinship system, the sexual identity of the head of the family formulated the sexual identity of the supreme deity. Each of these is an example of the theory that the sex of the deity is determined by a previously existing dominance of one sex over the other. In the case of the goddess, the higher position of women in the family and in society. Alongside these theories, there have been reams of pseudo-poetic material about the deification of the female as the symbol of fertility by the male, the awe of the magic of her ability to produce a child, supposedly making her the object of his worship.
And I'm just stopping here because this makes a lot of sense to me, right? That prior to patriarchal domination, that women would be seen as that deity, right? We brought forth life. They didn't have the sex education that we have now that teaches us, the part that man plays. So to them, it was like, oh my gosh, the women, they bring forth life. I'm sure that, again, that awe of how that occurs propped up the woman, which makes perfect sense to me, because whether you are male or female, you come from a woman, right? You are birthed of a woman. So to me, that makes perfect sense that the surrounding deities prior to modern times was women, right? Like how the questions of how life is born, well, it comes from a woman, not understanding how, the act of sex works. Which I think I said in some other videos, I've seen in other matriarchal societies, not that they don't understand how sex works now, but, the women and the children born, like They didn't care who the father was. You know, they were accepted into the tribe, into that family, because they were birthed from the woman that was in that family. They didn't need to know who the father was for acceptance or for any reason whatsoever. And I've mentioned it before, and I kind of want to do a video going deeper into it, is a modern matriarchal society in, I think it's China. And the women there, like, marriage and things is not a big deal. Hookup culture is not a big deal. They have a bridge that they can meet people at and mingle with. And if they choose that they, you know, I like you, I want to take you home, you know, they do just that. And, you know, the child knowing their father is not a big deal. Like, they may see them in town, but it's the men within the family, like the sons, the uncles, the cousins, that are that father figure to that boy, are that father figure to that child, girl child, right? It's they don't have a big connection to needing the father in the home, because there are men in the home regardless, right? Because they work together. In that particular society, I do know that women are actually more upheld. The men don't do much work, but we'll get into that on another video.
Just mentioned, Fraser suggested that the high status of women led to the worship of the goddess as supreme being, basing his conclusions on years of study of primitive and classical societies. But as a result of his research, he also connected the worship of the female deity to a mother kinship system and ancestor worship, explaining that wherever the goddess is superior to the god and ancestresses more reverently worshipped than ancestors, there is nearly always a mother kin structure. Robertson Smith also related the sexual identity of the supreme deity to the kinship system prevalent in each society. Whatever the suggested order of cause and effect, one of the major factors which continually appears in the material, concerned with the status and role of women in the ancient female religion in historic times, is its close connection to female kinship, matrilineality, perhaps the very origins of its development. In examining the position of women, this mother or female kin structure, leading to matrilineal descent of name and property, should be carefully studied. Matrilineality is generally defined as that societal structure in which inheritance takes place through the female line, sons, husbands, or brothers, gaining access to title and property only as the result of their relationship to the woman who is the legal owner. Matrilineal descent does not mean matriarchy, which is defined as women in power, or more specifically, the mother as the head of the family, taking this position in community or state government as well. In some matrilineal societies, the brother of the woman who holds the rights to the name and property plays an important role. Yet we cannot ignore the probability that matrilineal and matrilocal customs would affect the status and position of women in various ways. The subtleties of the power and bargaining position that come with the ownership of house, property, or title, or as in matrilocal societies, women residing in the village or home of their own parents rather than their in-laws, should be considered. The economics of the Neolithic and early historic agricultural societies were discussed by sociologist V. Klein in 1946. She suggested that in early society, women wielded the main sources of wealth. They were the owners of the house, the producers of food. They provided shelter and security. Economically, therefore, man was dependent upon woman. Societies that followed female or mother kinship customs have been known in the past and still appear in many areas of the world. The theory that most societies were originally matrilineal, matriarchal, and even polyandrous, one woman with several husbands, was the subject of several extensive studies in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Scholars such as Johann Bachhofen, Robert Briffaut, and Edward Hartland accepted the idea of ancient matriarchy and polyandry, substantiating their theories with a great deal of evidence. But they regarded these systems as a specific stage in evolutionary development. They suggested that all societies had to pass through a matriarchal stage before becoming patriarchal and monogamous, which they appear to have regarded as a superior stage of civilization. But as Jaquetta Hawkes observes, today it is unfashionable to talk about former, more matriarchal orders of society. Nevertheless, there is evidence from many parts of the world that the role of women has weakened since earlier times in several sections of social structure.
And we know why, right? There's a reason why even now men are trying to scale back on the things that feminism has brought forward for women of today, right? I was just on TikTok scrolling, and because this is this deconstructing patriarchy, I watch plenty of videos and plenty of lives that talk about this. The men have literally been saying in comment section and on lives that this is what they want. They're like, women have too much now. Hold on. Sorry, I live in the city. But yeah, they're like, women have too much now. They don't understand. This is why men can't move forward with women. And it's really because they, in their mind, don't understand or realize or want to even have women on the same level as themselves. There was literally a TikTok this morning where a Latina woman was talking about Latino men who come from and immigrate to North America, and how they have this disdain for the fact that sometimes they work under a woman, and people in the comments are like, yeah, I have an uncle who literally quit his job because his boss was a woman, and a woman that he knew. Like, he couldn't put himself in the position to work underneath a woman. Like, it was so much so that he quit that job. And you're seeing it reverberate, right? Because women, now that we have access to education, now that we have access to our own, we can buy our own homes and we can have our own bank accounts, we don't want to put up with them. At first, when we were first released, we still had this fairy tale idea of what it is to be with a man, what it is to marry a man, what it should be as far as relationship dynamics go. But as we grow and as we see and we research and we learn, we see that that's not the case, that it's literally a lie, and that they're really not naturally meant to be in charge. And I talk about this in my videos as well. I have a video that talks about, women are superior. And I do believe that women are superior. And it's not to say that that means I hate men or I think that they ain't ish. And to be honest, I think a lot of you are ain't ish, not all of you, but a lot of you. And it reverberates true when we talk about these topics and we have the men coming in droves, trying to discredit and trying to just spew their misogynistic tropes onto us, trying to get us to submit to it again and telling us that we're stupid. I have a video where it talks about, also on here as well, if women could survive without women, right? Because men are women's biggest predators. And the outrage that still now, it's been weeks and months and people still are commenting, specifically men are still commenting on that weather will destroy you. Women will destroy each other. Women don't get along. And I'm just like, I don't know what you're seeing, because for the most part, women get along, especially when there's no men involved. From what I've seen, women can get along for the most part. Yes, there are some women with severe internalized misogyny that cannot get along with other women and have these same misogynistic tropes as these men do. But you're seeing that die out more and more as more and more generations come into this world and have the freedom and learn from their mothers and their grandmothers that they're better off on their own. Like, our grandmothers did not have a choice, and they talk about that, right? They kind of push, get your education, get your own, don't rely on a man, don't, you know what I mean? And these are women who had to do that, rely on men. So it's interesting, but I don't want to just ramble on too much. We're going to just continue on. And I am also following along with my book. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. But yeah, let's continue.
Most of the studies of matriarchy were based upon anthropological analogy and the classical literature of Greece and Rome. Since most of these works were researched in the 19th and earliest part of the 20th centuries, these writers did not have access to much of the archaeological evidence that is available today. Despite specific misunderstandings or biased value judgments, we may yet find that these writers were prophetically ahead of their time. Today we have the use of a much greater body of material produced by extensive archaeological excavation of the Near and Middle East throughout this century, as well as the material available to those earlier writers. It is true that the chance fortunes of archaeological finds, what remains undiscovered, what is found too damaged to read, what cannot be deciphered, and what has perished as the result of the nature of the original material, present limitations. Hammurabi's Law Code of Babylon, about 1790 BC, long regarded as the oldest ever compiled, is now known to have been preceded by several others, more recently discovered. Still, only one of these dates back to about 2300 BC, and the others to about 2000 BC or slightly later. So we must still rely on material that appears in written form only after the beginnings of the northern invasions. But carefully sifting through the available evidence and commentary, which differ according to location and era, we may gain some insight into the status of women in goddess-worshipping societies. The goddess religion, though slowly declining, still existed.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. But I did read some of this book prior to, starting this journey of reading it as a series. I did get through chapter 3, and we're getting to one of my favorite parts. They start going through. You know what? Let me not. We will get into it. I'm gonna have some things to say. Hold on.
Ethiopia and Libya. All authority was vested in the woman. 49 years before the birth of Christ, a man from Roman Sicily wrote of his travels in northern Africa and some of the Near Eastern countries, recording his observations of people along the way. He was keenly interested in cultural patterns and was certainly one of the forerunners of the fields of anthropology and sociology. This man was known as Diodorus Siculus, Diodorus of Sicily. Many statements reporting the high or even dominant status of women were included in his writings. We may question why he, more than any other classical writer, recorded so much information about women warriors and matriarchy in the nations all about him. He did not belittle the men who lived in such social systems. That did not appear to be his aim. Indeed, he seemed to be rather admiring and respectful of the women who wielded such power. It was Diodorus who reported that the women of Ethiopia carried arms, practiced communal marriage, and raised their children so communally that they often confused even themselves as to who the natural mother had been. In parts of Libya, where the goddess Neith was highly esteemed, accounts of Amazon women still lingered, even in Roman times. Diodorus described a nation in Libya as follows. All authority was vested in the woman, who discharged every kind of public duty. The men looked after domestic affairs just as the women do among ourselves, and did as they were told by their wives. They were not allowed to undertake war service, or to exercise any functions of government, or to fill any public office, such as might have given them more spirit to set themselves up against the women. The children were handed over immediately after birth to the men, who reared them on milk and other foods suitable to their age. Diodorus wrote of warrior women existing in Libya, reporting that these women had formed into armies which had invaded other lands. According to him, they revered the goddess as their major deity and set up sanctuaries for her worship. Though he gives no specific name, the accounts probably refer to the Libyan warrior goddess known as Neith, who was also revered under that name in Egypt.
Did y'all hear that? Did you hear it? Did you hear it? Did you hear that? What were the men doing? Who was in charge? And in a place such as Libya and Ethiopia, Black countries, I'm just, and they're about to go into Egypt, right? We were kings. We were kings. No, you had queens, you had goddesses. Your historical lineage, if you go back further than patriarchy, takeover, all authority was vested in the woman. So we are quite capable of being in charge. We have been. I mean, we discharge every type of, and the reason why it's just like literally, y'all, sorry, I'm trying to stay out the way of this, but literally, y'all, like when I did that video of, if there were no men around, who would women need protection from? These are all the things that they swore up and down that they believed we couldn't do, that we've never done. And you know what? It's funny because my next video too is about a new study that came out where men are their own references. Like when they speak, they're literally just thinking about their thoughts, but they present it as facts. Even, but anyways, we're not going to get too much into that right now. But we were warriors. We were governors. We were queens. We were in public office, and we left the child rearing to the men, which I'm not sure would be the safest option these days, especially with the higher rates of sexual predation. But back then, I don't even think they would do something like that, because I'm sure that the offense for that would probably mean their lives, right? And also, they were not brainwashed with all of this misogynistic tropes, and weren't overridden with pornography. I know I can't say that word, so I'll say pornography and other aspects that promote sexual deviances. Am I saying that right? You know what I mean. So yeah, this is quite interesting. This is when this book got interesting for me. I was really excited to get to chapter 3. You know, like most books, it starts off slow, but I'm like, ooh, we're about to get to the juicy part right here, because they're about to break down. And there's no reason for this to lie. It's not like historical structures. These are things that they wrote, right? And it's not even to say that they were, you know, necessarily hating on the fact that it was so. Like she said, like this person here, he was kind of like in awe, like, oh, these women are really taking charge. These women, you know, they're amazing. Like, wow, like they actually, like, they're governing everything, right? And it doesn't miss me that he's talking about places in Africa where our lineage comes from. Anyways, I'm going to take a quick break, just a quick break. I'm going to get some water because I'm thirsty, and then we're going to come right back, and we're going to get right back into it, because Egypt is next. Egypt is next, and the we were kings. But it says, while the husbands stay home and weave. Weave? What they weaving? Then we're going to get into it.
Hey, you guys, it's your girl, Dayna Patreace, aka the Black Fairy. And I am just here to remind you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, okay? Click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos or any new lives, okay? I will be coming here with more and more information, so please, you don't want to miss out. And this is just a quick reminder and a quick thank you, because it's a free way to support the channel and to support me. I love y'all.
All right, y'all. Like I said, we're going to get back into it. Let's press play. I'm excited. I'm learning so much.
Egypt, while the husbands stay home and weave. In prehistoric Egypt, the goddess held supremacy in Upper Egypt, the south, as Nekbet, symbolized as a vulture. The people of Lower Egypt, which includes the northern Delta region, worshipped their supreme goddess as a cobra, using the name Uazit, Great Serpent. From about 3000 BC onward, the goddess known as Nut, Net or Nit, probably derived from Nekbet, was said to have existed when nothing else had yet been created. She then created all that had come into being. According to Egyptian mythology, it was she who first placed Ra, the sun god, in the sky. Other texts of Egypt tell of the goddess as Hathor in this role of creator of existence, explaining that she took the form of a serpent at that time. In Egypt, the concept of the goddess always remained vital. The introduction of male deities, just as the dynastic periods begin, about 3000 BC, will be more thoroughly discussed in Chapter 4. This probably lessened her original supremacy as it was known in Neolithic societies. But goddess worship continued, and in conjunction with this, the women of Egypt appeared to have benefited in many ways. Diodorus wrote at great length of the worship of the goddess Isis, the Greek translation for Osset, who had incorporated the aspects of both Uazit and Hathor. Isis was also closely associated with the goddess as Nut, who was mythologically recorded as her mother. In paintings, Isis wore the wings of Nekhbet. Diodorus explained that according to Egyptian religion, Isis was revered as the inventor of agriculture, as a great healer and physician, and as the one who first established the laws of justice in the land. He then recorded what we today may find a most startling description of the laws of Egypt, explaining that they were the result of the reverence paid to this mighty goddess. He wrote, "It is for these reasons, in fact, that it was ordained that the queen should have greater power and honor than the king, and that among private persons, the wife should enjoy authority over the husband, husbands agreeing in the marriage contract that they will be obedient in all things to their wives."
What? What did you say? What was that in Egypt? In Egypt, we were kings, they scream. We were kings. But according to this, it says, he wrote, "It is for these reasons, in fact, that was ordained that the queen should have greater power and honor than the king, and among private persons, the wife should enjoy authority over the husband. Husbands agreeing in marriage contract that they will be obedient in all things to their wives." Not that we were king's crew. Not that we was king's crew. This tickles me, y'all. This tickles me because what you say in Egypt? What men were to be obedient to their wives? What? No. And even when I was learning about Black history, none of the men who did like hidden colors, that they didn't touch on that. They didn't touch on that. Okay, I'm doing too much. We're gonna continue, y'all. We're gonna continue. There is more. Like I said, this chapter is quite a long one. So, but again, I do have to stop and make commentary. So, but do you hear what I hear? Do you hear what I hear? Okay, let's tap in.
Fraser commented on the relationship between the veneration of Isis and the customs of female kinship, and stated that, in Egypt, the archaic system of mother-kin, with its preference for women over men in matters of property and inheritance, lasted down to Roman times. There is further evidence that Egypt was a land where women had great freedom and control of their own lives, and perhaps of their husbands as well. Herodotus of Greece, several centuries before Diodorus, wrote that in Egypt, women go in the marketplace, transact affairs, and occupy themselves with business, while the husbands stay home and weave. His contemporary Sophocles stated that their thoughts and actions all are modeled on Egyptian ways, for there the men sit at the loom indoors, while the wives work abroad for their daily bread. Professor Cyrus Gordon wrote in 1953 of life in ancient Egypt. He tells us that in family life, women had a peculiarly important position for inheritance, passed through the mother rather than through the father. This system may well hark back to prehistoric times, when only the obvious relationship between mother and child was recognized, but not the less apparent relationship between father and child. Dr. Murray suggested that woman's condition was high, due perhaps to their economic independence. S.W. Barron writes that in Egyptian papyri, many women appear as parties in civil litigations and independent business transactions, even with their own husbands and fathers. One of the earliest archaeologists of the pyramids of Egypt, Sir William Flinders Petrie, wrote in 1925 that in Egypt all property went in the female line. The woman was the mistress of the house, and in early tales, she is represented as having entire control of herself and the place. Discussing the position of women in ancient Egypt, theologian and archaeologist Roland DeVoe wrote in 1965 that in Egypt, the wife was often the head of the family, with all the rights such a position entailed. Obedience was urged upon husbands in the maxims of Ptah-hotep. Marriage contracts of all periods attest the extremely independent social and economic position of women. According to E. Meyer, who is quoted in the Varting study, among the Egyptians, the women were remarkably free. As late as the 4th century BC, there existed side by side with patriarchal marriage, a form of marriage in which the wife chose the husband and could divorce him on payment of compensation. Love poems discovered in Egyptian tombs strongly hint that it was the Egyptian women who did the courting, oftentimes wooing the male by plying him with intoxicants to weaken his protestations. Robert Briffaut wrote of an Egyptian woman clerk who later became a governor and eventually the commander-in-chief of an army.
Okay, I just want to stop right there for a second. Not us drugging the men. Not women drugging the men. That shouldn't be funny. That shouldn't be funny. It wouldn't be funny if it was the other way around. But this part really stood out to me. Just this idea. It's like they inverted everything, right? And it's sold us back to us as this was a man's place. And this is how things have always been. And that's not the case. Even Roland DeVoe, that was in 1965. That's not a long time ago. You know, my sister was born in the 70s. I was born in the 80s. I'm 1984 baby. So these developments and these theses and these letters and these books, why aren't they taught? You know, and I know why they're not taught. It's because we can't have these ideas in our head, right? About ourselves or being able to view ourselves in that position, right? I do feel like our governments and the people who oversee our governments are very well aware of what knowledge can do. There was a show, a lot of you may have watched in your younger years, depending on when you were born. It was actually a movie. It started off as a movie. It was The Dark Crystal. Netflix rebooted it as a TV show. And I always say that the TV show is good. It's a slow start. It's kind of boring in the beginning. But if you could suffer through the first few episodes, it gets really deep, especially in the spiritual context of how we are controlled and how they have separated us in many a regard. It's called The Dark Crystal. Perhaps I can do videos on that as well. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. It is quite interesting. I do feel like the Gelfling is a reflection of humanity, is a reflection of how we were controlled by outside sources, how they siphon our energy, how they go about keeping us separated by tribes. There's inner earth. They talk about the telepathy that we have, that they have, right, amongst each other to share. And I feel like with what they've done to our food, what they do to the air, we've lost a lot of gifts that we would have naturally had if said things had never happened. It's all quite interesting, but just seeing this, and even in the sense that a woman could be as bold to be like, find a man that she likes, and to be able to be the one to be like, hey, I like you, and I want to take you home, you know, and like just be that, you know. And that's such like, that's so Lilith. That's so, you know, like if you have learned about any other goddesses, you know that, especially the love goddesses, that they were not, you know, against seducing a man, being that seductress, that dark feminine energy, right? It's very interesting, but we're going to continue.
A most enlightening and significant study on the social structure and position of women in Egypt was done in 1949 by Dr. Margaret Murray, painstakingly tracing the lineage of royal families in Egypt. She eventually proved that at the level of royalty, the Egyptian culture at most periods was matrilineal. Royalty was studied because records for these people were most available. According to Murray, it was the daughters, not the sons, who were the actual inheritors of the royal throne. She suggests that the custom of brother-sister marriage then developed, allowing a son to gain access to the royal privilege in this way. She writes that the matrilineal right to the throne was the reason that Egyptian princesses, for so many centuries, were married within the family and were not available for international marriage alliances. This may clarify why the goddess Isis, who Fraser stated was a more important deity than her brother or husband Osiris, and whom Diodorus cited as the origin of the generally high position of women in Egypt, was known as the throne. But even in Egypt, women were slowly losing their prestigious position. Sir Flinders Petrie, incidentally a deeply respected colleague of Dr. Murray's at the University of London, discussed the role of priestesses in ancient Egypt. He pointed out how their position had changed between the time of the earliest dynasties, 3000 BC onward, to the 18th dynasty, 1570 to 1300 BC. According to the available records, the goddess known as Hathor, much the same deity as Isis, was in earliest times served by 61 priestesses and 18 priests, while the goddess known as Neith was attended solely by priestesses. By the time of the 18th dynasty, women were no longer even part of the religious clergy, but served only as temple musicians. It is in the 18th dynasty that Egypt was made to feel the greatest influence of the Indo-Europeans, a factor again discussed at greater length in chapters 4 and 5. Incidentally, the use of the word pharaoh, generally summoning up images even more powerful than the word king, actually comes from the term paro, which literally means great house. It was only from the time of the 18th dynasty that the word was used to signify the royal male of that household. Sumer. The women of former days used to take 2 husbands. Professor Saggs wrote in 1962 of the societies of Mesopotamia, which included both Sumer and Babylon. Mesopotamia generally refers to the areas of Iraq along and between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, starting at the Persian Gulf and reaching up to Anatolia. He examined the relationship of the reverence for goddesses to the status of women in Sumer, about 3000 BC to 1800 BC in southern Iraq, concluding that in the earliest periods, women were much better off than in the later periods, and that they gradually lost ground over the years. Professor Saggs reports that the status of women was certainly much higher in the early Sumerian city-state than it subsequently became. There are hints that in the very beginning of Sumerian society, women had a much higher status than in the heyday of Sumerian culture. This chiefly rests on the fact that in early Sumerian religion, a prominent position is occupied by goddesses, who afterwards virtually disappeared, save, with the one exception of Ishtar, as consorts to particular gods. The underworld itself was under the sole rule of a goddess, for a myth explains how she came to take a consort, and goddesses played a part in the divine decision-making assembly in the myths. There is even one strong suggestion that polyandry may have at one time been practiced, for the reforms of Orikagina refer to women who had taken more than one husband. Some scholars shied away from this conclusion, suggesting that the reference might be only to the remarriage of a widow, but the wording of the Sumerian text does not really support this. I may add that the goddess of the underworld does not merely take a consort, but has her hair pulled, is dragged from the throne, and is threatened with death, until she agrees to marry her assailant, the god Nergal, who then kisses away her tears, becomes her husband, and rules beside her. The Orikagina reform is dated at about 2300 BC. It reads, "The women of former days used to take 2 husbands, but the women of today would be stoned with stones if they did this." Polyandry has been reported in the Dravidian goddess-worshipping areas of India, even in this century. The laws of the Sumerian state of Eshuna, written about 2000 BC, were found in a small town, thus possibly reflecting older attitudes. In them we read that if a man rejects his wife...
I just want to touch on one thing, because before it goes further into this, because she kind of glazed over that, where the story of the goddess of the underworld, and it does not, like, it doesn't miss me that in all ways of a man overtaking a woman's place, that brute force is used to do so, right? Even when we look back at these things and how, like, that's how they did it. They used violence and their strength, their physical strength, to overcome us and to then enslave us and to make these changes. So, even the fact that, when she, and I guess maybe, like, because this isn't the point of this story or even this book, they didn't really take to it, but her assailant, the god Nergal, who kisses away her tears and becomes her husband and rules beside her, again, not over her, but with her. Her, like, it's, I don't know, there's this romanticism that I just didn't like about it, that kind of like rubbed me wrong. Like, but then that too is what we find in patriarchy, right? They romanticize the bad boy. They romanticize that kind of like abuse in order to receive love or gain love. So, I mean, am I surprised? No, but I don't know. It just rubbed me the wrong way, and I wanted to stop and just speak on that. We'll continue.
His wife after she bears a child, and takes another wife, he shall be driven from the house and from whatever he owns, and if any accept him, they may follow him. These same laws also state that if a woman is married but has a child with another man while her husband is away at war, she is still legally regarded as the wife of the first man. There is no mention of punishment for adultery. Permission for marriage had to be received from both mother and father. The position and activities of a group of Sumerian women known as the Naditu were studied in depth by Rivka Harris in 1962. Carefully examining Sumerian texts, she found that the Naditu women were engaged in the business activities of the temple, held real estate in their own names, lent money, and generally engaged in various economic activities. She also found accounts at this same period of many women scribes. Yet, we read in Professor Sidney Smith's chapter in Hooke's Myth, Ritual, and Kingship that the word Naditu probably means woman thrown down, that is, surrendered to the god. In the Sumerian hymns, the female precedes the male. The Epic of Gilgamesh reveals that the official scribe of the Sumerian heaven was a woman, while the initial invention of writing was credited to a goddess. As I mentioned previously, it may well have been the priestesses, possibly the Naditu, who kept the temple business accounts, who first developed the art of writing. The earliest examples of writing, from about 3200 BC, discovered in the temple of the goddess Inanna of Erech, where many of the Naditu women lived, turned out to be the temple's accounts of payment for land rental. Stephen Langdon, eminent Oxford scholar, writing in 1930, observed that the legends associated with the Sumerian Queen of Heaven, Inanna, had probably been worked out under a matriarchal system of society. This is also suggested by the changes in the image and role of the goddess Inanna, when we find her centuries later as the Babylonian Ishtar. In the Sumerian myth, Inanna exhibited her power and omnipotent wrath at her son-lover Dumosi's refusal to show proper respect to her by turning him over to the demons of the land of the dead. While 13 centuries later, in the Babylonian myth of Ishtar, a newer version of much the same story, the goddess grieved at the accidental death of the youth. In general, the records of the Sumerian reforms of Orikagina of about 2300 BC were strongly communally oriented. They referred to the fruit trees and food of the temple lands, which were to be used for those in need rather than by priests, which was apparently fast becoming the custom at that time. The fact that on these tablets it was repeatedly mentioned that these reforms hark back to the way things were done in earlier periods suggests that the earliest societies of Sumer were more communal. Most interesting is the word used to label these reforms, amargi, which has received the double translation of freedom and return to the mother. Elam, naked before the high priestess. In 1973, Dr. Walther Hinn suggested that the original supremacy of the goddess in Elam, slightly east of Sumer, and in close contact by 3000 BC, indicated a matriarchal approach in the devotees of her religion. He explained that though she was supreme in the 3rd millennium, she later became secondary to her consort, Hamban. She was then known as the Great Wife. In Susa, at the northern end of the Elamite territories, the male consort was known as In Shushinek. In earliest times, he was known as Father of the Weak. By mid-2nd millennium, he was called King of the Gods, and in the 8th century BC, he was invoked as protector of the gods of heaven and earth. In the early periods of Elam, the deities appear to have been served by female and male clergy, the men appearing naked before the high priestess, as was the custom in early Sumer. Hinz explains that in Elam, much like the Naditu women of Sumer, one special group among the priestesses was formed by those women or maidens who had dedicated their lives to the great goddess. These women were primarily involved in the buying, selling, and renting of land. Legal documents from Elam, primarily from after 2000 BC, reveal that women were often the sole heirs. One married woman refused to make her inheritance joint with her husband, and intended to pass the inheritance along to her daughter. Another tablet stated that a son and daughter were to share equally. The daughter was mentioned first. Several tablets describe situations where the husband was leaving everything he owned to his wife, and insisted that their children would inherit only if they cared for their mother with the greatest respect. Babylon.
Now, right now, according to the clock, it's like we're getting into like almost an hour. I'm just wondering, and I don't know, because like I know you guys, those of you who are enjoying this, if you want me to go into like a part 2, I'm just thinking about like maybe I should cut it into parts, like, because it does go on to some further information of just different societies. You know what? We'll see. I'm going to see. How about this? If you made it this far, let me know in the comment section if this is too long for you, right? Because I'm reaching the 15-minute mark. So, and then you can let me know if longer chapters like these you would prefer to be split into 2. Like, I will continue with this and we'll see how long it is. But and it's kind of like, even because it is just me, this is a pre-recording, you know, I'm not able to engage with people in like the comment section, so it does seem like it's hard to know as far as engagement with YouTube and the videos if it makes sense to go past an hour. But if you guys could just kindly let me know in the comment section of whether or not that these long videos will work for you, let me know. I'm just going to take a quick break because I do need to use the washroom. I'll be right back, and I'll just let this little video run. And yeah, I'll be back.
Hey, y'all. Do you need a gratitude journal? Hey, y'all. Do you need a gratitude journal? Well, if you do, me, myself, and I, Dayna Patreace, aka the Black Fairy, have gratitude journals available for sale in the link below. They go for $6.99 USD, and no worries. By clicking the link in the bio, it will send you straight to your country and to your currency. So don't worry about that. But just to give you a rough estimate, it is $6.99. Now, if you didn't know, gratitude is one of the best ways to not only affirm what it is that you want in your life, but to affirm what it is you want to see in your life. With that being said, this is a great tool and opportunity for you to take a part of. It's an inexpensive way for you to tap into the law of attraction. I highly, highly recommend it. And I love y'all. Link in the bio below.
So yeah, we're going to continue. Got to quickly use the washroom. Yeah, we have 43 minutes left. So yeah, I think, let's just roll with it. And like I said, you guys can let me know in the comments if you'd rather longer chapters like these maybe be split into 2. And we'll go from there.
To hold and manage their own estates. In Mesopotamia, the Akkadians, after a rise in position under Sargon in 2300 BC, eventually gained supremacy in about 1900 BC, gradually superseding the Sumerians as the cultural and political leaders of the area. They formed the nation known as Babylonia, installing their capital in the city of Babylon on the central Euphrates. The Akkadian language of the Babylonians became the international language of the Near East, but the religion of the Sumerians was incorporated into the Babylonian culture, and the Sumerian language was used much as Latin was employed in the masses of the Roman Catholic Church all over the world. By 1600 BC, the Kassites gained control of Babylon. Linguistic evidence suggests that the Kassites were ruled by the northern invaders, the Indo-Europeans, who had gradually infiltrated into Babylon and Assyria. Despite a loss of status in the position of women in Babylon, compared with their predecessors of Sumer, a loss that was accompanied by the gaining ascendancy of male deities, such as Marduk, who mythically murdered the creator goddess Tiamat to gain and secure his position, the women of Babylon still continued to hold certain rights of independence. The following quote is based upon the law code of Hammurabi, which preceded total Kassite control, but which may have been somewhat affected by continual Indo-European incursions from the north from at least 2000 BC onward. W. Boscawen, writing in 1894, reported that the freedom granted to the women in Babylonia allowed them to hold and manage their own estates, and this was especially the case with priestesses of the temple, who traded extensively. One of the most interesting and characteristic features of this early civilization of the Babylonians was the high position of women. The mother here is always represented by a sign which means goddess of the house. Any sin against the mother, any repudiation against the mother, was punished by banishment from the community. These are the facts which are evidently indicative of a people who at one time held the law of matriarchal descent. According to Devine, writing in 1965, in Babylonian law, the father gave the young bride certain possessions, which belonged to her in her own right, the husband having only the use of them. They reverted to the wife if she was widowed or divorced without fault on her part. In Babylon, she could acquire property, take legal action, be a party to contracts, and she had a certain share in her husband's inheritance. In Hammurabi's time, women were free to request divorce, and one Babylonian law declared that if a wife did not intend to be responsible for her husband's premarital debts, she had to obtain a document from him stating that he had agreed. This assumption of the financial responsibility in marriage suggests that most women may have taken part in business and financial affairs, as they did in Egypt, and perhaps at one time had been economically responsible for the family. 7 of Hammurabi's laws were concerned with the priestesses of the temple, their rights to inherit, and what they might or might not pass along to offspring, suggesting that the economic position of these women was a matter of concern and probably was quickly changing. Ishtar was revered as majestic queen whose decrees are preeminent. In one text, Ishtar herself says, "When at a trial of judgment I am present, a woman understanding the matter, I am." At Nimrud in northern Mesopotamia, records of women judges and magistrates have been unearthed, testifying to the vital and respected position women held there, even in the 8th century BC. In several cities, there were accounts of Babylonian priestesses who acted as oracular prophetesses, providing military and political advice to kings and leaders, revealing their powerful influence upon the affairs of state. Accounts of women scribes occur in all Babylonian periods, though there were more males in this field than women. We find in the laws of later Babylonia, which belonged to some time at the end of the 2nd millennium, that a married woman might no longer engage in business unless it was directed by her husband, son, or brother-in-law. If anyone engaged in business with her, even if he insisted that he did not know she was married, he was to be prosecuted as a criminal.
So it seems to me that as time went on, women kind of slowly, and again, we're losing such rights, not necessarily in matriarchal superiority as you saw kind of further in the past, but being more on more, say, equal footing, or even a little bit more subservient to men. It seems that it was a slow descent in some areas, at least to say the least, as far as like what we see now, right? Like it's a far cry. And again, it's just like learning all this. I just keep thinking about all the things that I was told growing up in a highly religious Christian household, you know, our duties to men and things like that. And that's how it's always been. The Bible, you know, is the beginning and the end as far as history goes, even though a lot of it is hypocritical and contradicting. I don't know. It's very interesting. Let me know below if you're catching the same vibe as me.
Anatolia. From of old, they have been ruled by the women. Just north of Babylon, and in very close political contact, was the area known as Anatolia, present-day Turkey, sometimes known as Asia Minor. In Neolithic periods in Anatolia, the great goddess was extolled. Her worship appeared in the shrines of Çatalhöyük of 6500 BC. Little is yet known of Anatolia directly after the Çatalhöyük period, but sometime before 2000 BC, Anatolia was invaded by the Indo-Europeans. The areas where the northern peoples made the heaviest settlements were in the central and south-central sections of Anatolia. Some of them conquered the land known as Hatti. The invaders, as well as the original inhabitants, thus came to be known as Hittites. Most of the goddesses who appear in the literature and texts of this area, written after the Hittite arrival, were actually the older Hattian deities. One of the most important female deities to survive was the sun goddess of Arena. Upon the Hittite conquests, she was assigned a husband who was symbolized as a storm god. Although this storm god gained supremacy in most of the cities where the northern peoples ruled, in Arena, he remained in second place. But curiously enough, Hittite queens appear in several texts in a very close relationship to this Hattian sun goddess. They acted as her high priestess. Though there is no conclusive evidence to substantiate it, the existence of these texts suggests the possibility that the invaders, once martially conquering the land, may then have married Hattian priestesses to gain a more secure, legitimate right to the throne in the eyes of the conquered population. In the western sections of Anatolia, matrilineal descent and goddess worship continued into classical times. Strabo, shortly before the birth of Christ, wrote of northern Anatolian towns as far east as Armenia, where children who were born to unmarried women were legitimate and respectable. They simply took the name of their mothers, who, according to Strabo's reports, were some of the most noble and aristocratic of citizens. It is possible that at the time of the Hittite invasions, many of the goddess-worshipping peoples may have fled to the west. The renowned temple of the goddess in the city of Ephesus was the target of the Apostle Paul's zealous missionary efforts. Acts chapter 19, verse 27. This temple, which legend and classical reports claim was founded by Amazons, was not completely closed down until AD 380. All along this western section, which included the areas known as Lycia, Lydia, and Caria, there were accounts in classical Greek and Roman literature of the widespread veneration of the mother of all deities, along with reports of women warriors, the Amazons. Diodorus wrote of a nation in this area in which women held the supreme power and royal authority. According to his reports, the queen of this land assigned the tasks of spinning wool and other domestic duties to the men, while law was established by the queen. He claimed that the rights to the throne belonged to the queen's daughter and succeeding women in the family line. It was in the land of Lydia that the legendary Indo-European Greek Hercules was said to have been kept as a servile lover to Queen Omphale. We may at this point question whether the numerous tales of Amazon women may not actually have been the later Indo-European Greek accounts of the women who tried to defend the ancient goddess shrines and repel the patriarchal northern invaders. Yet, we read in the Encyclopedia Britannica, the only plausible explanation of the story of the Amazons is that it is a variety of the familiar tale of a distant land where everything is done the wrong way about, thus women fight, which is man's business. Throughout the classical Greek period, matrilineal descent and suggestions of matriarchy in western Anatolia were repeatedly reported among the Lycians, where they appear to have lingered the longest or were most noted. Herodotus wrote, "Ask a Lycian who he is, and he answers by giving his own name, that of his mother, and so on, in the female line." Nicholas of Damascus reported, "They name themselves after their mothers, and their possessions pass by inheritance to the daughters instead of the sons." Heraclides Ponticus said of the Lycians, "From of old they have been ruled by the women." Crete.
This is interesting to me. I'm sure a lot of us have heard about the Amazonians and whether they truly existed. There was a video, and I know that I saved it, and I wanted to do a video on it because it was talking about the Amazonians, but not in Africa, not in that part of the world. I believe it was in North America, South America, if I'm not mistaken, where women very much so didn't keep men around. It was just them. They used them to procreate. If they had a son, the son left with the father. If they had a daughter, the father left without their child, and they were not seen as needed or necessity outside of procreation, if I remember the video correctly. I don't want to misquote it or anything, but I'm definitely going to get more into it. So I thought that was interesting how they talked about the Amazonians and the possibilities of which they reigned. And maybe they were around several other areas as well. Maybe there were societies that were much like it. I'm not sure. But again, we will get into that in a separate video.
Dominated by the female principle. Many classical authors wrote that the Lycians and the Carians had strong affinities with the island of Crete. Some claimed that Lycia had once been a colony of that thriving island culture. Upon Crete, goddess figures have been found in various Neolithic sites, though none as old as those on the mainland. On the Masara plain of Crete, the buildings known as tholoi, extremely similar to those of the Halof site of Arpatia, have also been discovered. From Neolithic periods until the Dorian invasion, Crete was the society that is most repeatedly thought to have been matrilineal and possibly matriarchal. The former director of the British School of Archaeology in Greece, Sinclair Hood, wrote in the Minoans, Crete in the Bronze Age, "It seems likely enough that customs of the kind described as matriarchy, mother rule, persisted in Crete. These arise in primitive societies where people do not comprehend when a baby is born who its father can be. The children are therefore named after the mothers, and all inheritance is through the female line. Primeval traditions of this kind survived in western Anatolia into classical times. Thus, among the Carians on the west coast of Anatolia, Succession was still through the mother in the 4th century BC, and in Lycia, to the southeast of Caria, children were named after their mothers. Charles Seltman wrote in 1952 of this highly developed culture of Crete, whose beginnings preceded biblical times by many centuries. He stated that upon Crete, matriarchy had been the way of life. He discussed the sexual freedom of women, matrilineal descent, and the role of the king, pointing out the high status of women in and around the land in which the goddess appears to have been the very core of existence. Among the Mediterraneans, wrote Seltman, as a general rule, society was built around the woman, even on the highest levels, where descent was in the female line. A man became king or chieftain only by a formal marriage, and his daughter, not his son, succeeded, so that the next chieftain was the youth who married his daughter. Until the northerners arrived, religion and custom were dominated by the female principle. In the Aegean civilization, Gustav Glotz, writing in 1925, examined the role of woman on Crete and asserted that women initially controlled the form and rites of the religion. He explains that the priestesses long presided over religious practices. Woman was the natural intermediary with divinities, the greatest of whom was woman, deified. Hosts of objects represent the priestesses at their duties. The participation of men in the cult was like the association of a god with a goddess, a late development. Their part in the religious ceremonies was always a subordinate one, even when the king became the high priest of the bull. As if to extenuate their encroachment and to baffle the evil spirits to whose power this act had exposed them, they assumed for divine services the priestly costume of women. While private worship was performed in front of small idols, in public worship the part of the goddess was played by a woman. It is the high priestess who takes her place on the seat of the goddess, sits at the foot of the sacred tree, or stands on the mountain peak to receive worship and offerings from her acolytes and from the faithful. Stylianos Alexiou, director of the Archaeological Museum in Heraklion, writes in the chapter on the religion of Crete in Minoan civilization, the alabaster throne at Knossos was intended, according to Helga Reusch, for the priestess queen, who, flanked by the griffins painted on the wall, personified the goddess. In the royal villa, the throne, which is set apart like a kind of sacred altar, shows that an actual person sat there to receive worship. According to Matz, when the queen descended the palace stairs to the courts within the shrines, she represented an authentic epiphany of the deity to the host of ecstatic worshippers. In 1958, Jacquetta Hawkes presented some perceptive observations on the status of women on Crete, commenting that, although one may consider the possibility that the goddess may have been a masculine dream, Cretan men and women were everywhere accustomed to seeing a splendid goddess queening it over a small and suppliant male god, and this concept must surely have expressed some attitude present in the human society that accepted it. She continued by pointing out that the self-confidence of women and their secure place in society was perhaps made evident by another characteristic. This is the fearless and natural emphasis on sexual life that ran through all religious expression and was made obvious in the provocative dress of both sexes and their easy mingling, a spirit best understood through its opposite, the total veiling and seclusion of Muslim women under a faith which even denied them a soul. In viewing the artifacts and murals at Knossos, the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion, and other museums on Crete, there is little doubt that the female divinity was for several millennia the principal sacred being on Crete, with women acting as her clergy. It is therefore interesting to follow the manifestations of the Cretan culture as they later appeared in early Greece, about 1,000 years before the classical Golden Age, about 500 to 200 BC, with which we are more familiar. Greece, the attack upon the matrilineal clans. The connections are made by the settlements on Crete and or the mainland of Greece that are attributed to people known as the Mycenaeans, so named by archaeologists, for one of the sites on the mainland, Mycenae. Clues to the origins of the people who inhabited these sites have presented scholars with some intriguing possibilities. Most believe that the Mycenaeans were a group of Indo-Europeans, perhaps the same people as the Achaeans, or possibly those from an earlier migration of tribes from the north. Other scholars assert that they were already residents of Crete and that they overthrew the previous government shortly before 1400 BC. Some relate them to the group known as the Sea Peoples, while still others suggest that they were the Philistines, or that the Philistines were a branch of the Mycenaeans. There has even been the suggestion that the Mycenaeans were related to the Hyksos, the shepherd kings, who used horse-drawn war chariots and had previously held Egypt under their rule for several centuries. The Hyksos were driven out of Egypt at much the same time as the Mycenaeans first appeared. Whatever their initial origins, the reason that the Mycenaeans are important to us here is that their culture, as we best know it, was partially Cretan and partially Greek. Most scholars believe that they carried the Cretan culture from Crete to Greece. The linear bead tablets of the Mycenaeans, which are inventory lists found at the Palace of Knossos, and all dated to the same year, about 1400 BC, used a language that scholars believe differed from those previously used on Crete. After many years of debate, most authorities accept that the language used on these tablets, written with many of the symbols and signs that had been used for an earlier language not yet acceptably deciphered, though Gordon has offered a body of evidence suggesting that it was closely related to the Canaanite language used in Ugarit, is an early form of Greek. If the Mycenaeans or their leaders were originally Indo-European, as the tablets suggest, once they settled in Crete, they soon adopted much of the subject matter and the style of the crafts techniques, the style of dress, the manner of writing, and the religion of the previous inhabitants of the island. Cottrell tells us that Mycenaean art continued to reflect the Minoan culture of the Mediterranean peoples, whose system of writing they had adopted. R.W. Hutchinson of the University of Cambridge writes that by the middle of the second millennium, probably, Greeks were already settling in Crete, but only in comparatively small numbers, and these Mycenaean Greeks had already adopted many Cretan cults and religious customs. Even on the mainland, we find survivals from Minoan or at least pre-Hellenic religion. In the catalog of prehistoric collections of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, the curators point out, in Mycenaean religion, where the adoption of many Cretan features is obvious, we may note above all the appearance of the Cretan nature goddess. In this vast museum is the collection of artifacts discovered in the excavations of the Mycenaean settlements on the mainland of Greece, a collection highlighted by the intricate craftsmanship of gold signet rings and seals that depict scenes of the goddess and her priestesses, scenes nearly identical with those produced in Minoan Crete. Discussing the linear bead tablets in which the names of several deities later known in classical Greece are briefly mentioned, Cottrell explains, there is also at Pylos on the mainland and at Knossos on Crete a frequent reference to Potnia, mistress or Our Lady. These last inscriptions confirm what archaeologists had long suspected from the evidence on seals discovered on the mainland, that the Mycenaeans also worshipped the Minoan mother goddess. The Mycenaeans inhabited and ruled Crete at the palace of Knossos shortly before a major holocaust, possibly caused by an invasion or earthquake. These same people also founded many pre-Greek cities on the mainland, and with them they brought the worship of the Cretan goddess. The Mycenaean age is generally placed between about 1450 and 1100 BC. Its beginnings date just before the period generally assigned to Moses. It thrived for centuries before the Greece of Homer, and it is likely that it was of events during or just after this period that Homer wrote. The quest for Helen may well have been the quest for the legal rights to the throne of Sparta. Although classical Greece is so often presented as the very foundation of our Western culture and civilization, it is interesting to realize that it actually came into being 25 centuries after the invention of writing, and was itself formulated and deeply influenced by the Near Eastern cultures that had preceded it by thousands of years. Greece was invaded by northern peoples several times. Robert Graves, in his introduction to the Greek myths, wrote in 1955, Achaean invasions of the 13th century BC seriously weakened the matrilineal tradition. When the Dorians arrived towards the close of the second millennium, patrilineal succession became the rule. With these northern people came the worship of the Indo-European Dios Pitor, literally God Father, eventually known in Greece as Zeus, and later in Rome as Jupiter. This transitional period of the change from the worship of the goddess to the male deity, the change most intensively brought about by the Dorian invasions, was the subject of E. Butterworth's Some Traces of the Pre-Olympian World, written in 1966. Butterworth managed to accomplish with Greece what Murray had done with Egypt. By carefully tracing the lineage of the royal houses, he ultimately showed that many of the greatest pre-Greek cities, which were essentially small nations, were originally matrilineal. He pointed out that Argos, Thebes, Tiryns, and Athens, as well as other cities, at one time followed matrilineal customs of descent. He explains that this was the result of the worship of the goddess and her Cretan origins, stating that Crete itself was matrilineal and possibly even matriarchal. His primary interest was in the patrilineal revolution, the time at which the patrilineal clans violently set about superimposing their customs upon all those around them. Matrilineality, though not universal in the Greek and Aegean world, was widely spread. The effect of the system of succession to the kingship and to the inheritance of property on the life of the times was immense. The majority of the clans were matrilineal by custom, and the greatest revolution in the history of early Greece was that by which the custom was changed from matrilineal to patrilineal succession, and the loyalty to the clan destroyed. From 3000 BC onward, priestesses had been portrayed in sculptures and appeared in murals and other artifacts of Crete, strongly suggesting that it was women who controlled the worship. Crete was later ruled by the Mycenaeans, who then adopted their religion and many aspects of their culture. Since the religious artifacts of the Mycenaeans depict the clergy of the goddess as female, it is quite probable that the women in the Mycenaean communities of Greece also held this privilege. Butterworth asserted that it was the women, especially the women of the royal houses, who were the protectors of the religion. He further explains that the attack upon the matrilineal clans destroyed the power of the clan world itself, and with it, its religion. The history of the times is penetrated through and through with the clash of patrilineal and matrilineal, as the old religious dynasties were broken, swept away, and re-established. The matrilineal world was brought to an end by a number of murderous assaults upon the heart of that world, the Patnia Mater, the great goddess herself. I cannot help but recall the Greek legend of the goddess known as Hera, whose worship appears to have survived from Mycenaean times, and her thwarted rebellion against her newly assigned husband Zeus, surely an allegorical reminder of those who struggled for the primacy of the goddess and lost. Yet, according to Hawkes, many of the attitudes about the lowly position of the women of classical Greece were greatly exaggerated by the bias of 19th century scholarship. She suggests that even in the classical period of Greece, women retained some of their Cretan predecessors' freedom. Just as
So this was a lot, but you can see that it's prevalent that women were always a part of society, at least up until a certain point. They held financial positions. They had access to buy their own land, and even their children names were passed on through the mother. A lot of these Greek legends and goddesses and gods and goddesses that we hear about, especially in Egypt, every male god has a counterpart that is a woman, right? From Thoth to whoever. It's something that I noticed, and I was like, well, how come we don't learn more about these counterparts? I do think it has to do with, again, keeping us in the dark about our own history, because if we do find out, just as they say about African Americans or Black people across the diaspora who have been affected by white supremacy and slavery, they say that there's this need to keep knowledge from us in order for us to be able to continue to be servants to them. And again, I'm seeing it more and more with how they are trying to roll back on women's rights. Oh, we gave too much. I do kind of feel like they believed that so much time has passed on that the brainwashing that they embedded in us would allow us to continue to move forward in that direction with men in regards to them being here, wanting a relationship, wanting marriage, wanting to have kids, and all these things. And it backfired, right? Which is why they're rolling back on everything now. It's very, it's interesting because history seems to always repeat itself. I do feel like the future of this world in the next few eras will be matriarchal or made to be matriarchal. I don't necessarily know or think that it has to be as strict as some of these other matriarch communities, as I think there is balance between the feminine and the masculine, not just within us as individuals, but in society as well. And it's just been in far too much imbalance that you see what's happening now, the loneliness epidemic men are going through and everything else on top of the sun. But this book has been very eye-opening in the sense of how far we've come from grace, how far women have come, and how even in with everything that they've done to us, they still cannot deny our presence, right? I did with the video that I did on Women Are Superior. It was from two males' perspectives, a male neurologist, who was he a neurologist? Or did he just do a lot of brain scans? Whatever the case may be, his research points that women are superior just because of the way that our brains are. The psychotherapist, he discussed the nature of men and how their nature is an aspect that doesn't make them the best leaders. So it's all very, very interesting to me. I hope you're enjoying this. We're going to continue, of course. But I just wanted to say a little something. Let's get into it. We have about 20 minutes left. Not bad.
As in Crete, women shared the power of the goddess, both psychologically and socially. Priestesses were of high standing, and priestly associations of women were formed round temples and holy places. There was an influential one, for example, associated with the famous temple of Artemis, Diana, at Ephesus. At this city, and indeed in Ionia generally, women and girls enjoyed much freedom. While women certainly won influence and responsibility by serving at the temples and great state festivals of the goddesses, there was also the liberation of the ancient cults. Respectable matrons and girls in large companies would spend whole nights on the bare hills in dances which stimulated ecstasy and in intoxication, perhaps partly alcoholic, but mainly mystical. Husbands disapproved, but it is said did not like to interfere in religious matters. In the classical age of Sparta, where the veneration of the goddess as Artemis continued to thrive, women were extremely free and independent. According to both Euripides and Plutarch, young Spartan women were not to be found at home, but in the gymnasia, where they tossed off their restricting clothing and wrestled naked with their male contemporaries. Women of Sparta appear to have had total sexual freedom, and though monogamy was said to be the official marriage rule, it was mentioned in several classical accounts that it was not taken very seriously. Plutarch reported that in Sparta, the infidelity of women was even somewhat glorified, while Nicholas of Damascus, perhaps as the result of some personal experience, tells us that a Spartan woman was entitled to have herself made pregnant by the handsomest man she could find, whether native or foreigner. Canaan, the social and legal position of an Israelite wife. I have saved the examination of the women in the two Hebrew nations of Judah and Israel for last, since we generally regard them as part of an isolated patriarchal society, which worshipped the male deity alone. At this point, it will be clarifying to compare the position of Hebrew women not only with their contemporaries in Babylon and Egypt, cultures so intertwined with their own, but also with the other women of Canaan, where they finally settled. In the city of Ugarit in northern Canaan of the 14th century BC, which is not a Hebrew community, there are records of a woman whose title was translated as Important Lady of the Royal House. She was known as the Adeth, meaning lady, as the female counterpart of Adon, meaning lord. The goddess in this area was known as Unath, which may be much the same word. The texts of Ugarit, present-day Ras Shamra in Syria, where legends of Anath were also unearthed, revealed that this important lady took an active part in political affairs. Claude Schaefer, co-director of the first excavation at Ugarit, wrote in 1939, "The social status of women, and particularly the mother of the family, thus appears to have been a high one in Ugarit." Ugaritan documents of this same period reveal that upon divorce or widowhood, a woman kept her own property. Legal records read much like those of Elam, stating that husbands left their possessions to their wives rather than their children. These children are told not to quarrel, but to respect and obey their mother. As I shall explain in the following two chapters, at Ugarit, there was a curious combination of the southern and northern cultures, reflected in their religious myths. There are accounts of many Indo-Europeans living in that city by the 14th century, yet the status of women does not appear to have been greatly affected by it at that time. Among the Ammonites of Canaan, a people with whom the Hebrews were in repeated conflict, women acted in official capacities. In 1961, archaeologist G. Landis wrote of the superior position of women being in agreement with nomadic practice. He stated that queens, such as the Queen of Sheba, about 950 BC, at times led Arab states or tribes, and that this was also attested in the 8th and 7th centuries BC. In contrast to the economic, legal, and social position of women all about them, the position of the Israelite women exhibits the effects of the almost total acceptance of the male deity Yahweh and the patriarchal society that accompanied it. According to the Bible, though no archaeological evidence has yet been found to confirm it, the Israelite laws date from the time of Moses, about 1300 to 1250 BC. They continue as the law of the Hebrews of Canaan until the fall of the northern kingdom known as Israel in 722 BC, and the fall of the southern kingdom known as Judah in 586 BC. These same laws still appear in the Old Testament of the Judeo-Christian Bible to this day. Through an intensive study of the Bible, archaeologist and priest Roland DeVoe made these observations about Hebrew women in his study of 1965, published as Ancient Israel. The social and legal position of an Israelite wife was inferior to the position a wife occupied in the great countries round about. All the texts show that Israelites wanted mainly sons to perpetuate the family line and fortune, and to preserve the ancestral inheritance. A husband could divorce his wife. Women, on the other hand, could not ask for divorce. The wife called her husband Baal or master. She also called him Adon, or Lord. She addressed him, in fact, as a slave addressed his master, or a subject, his king. The Decalogue includes a man's wife among his possessions. All her life, she remains a minor. The wife does not inherit from her husband, nor daughters from their father, except when there is no male heir. A vow made by a girl or a married woman needs, to be valid, the consent of the father or husband, and if this consent is withheld, the vow is null and void. A man had the right to sell his daughter. Women were excluded from the succession. DeVoe asserted that, unlike all the other cultures of the Near East, there were no priestesses allowed in the Israelite faith. He explained that the suggestion that there were women among the clergy of the temple clashes with an important linguistic fact. There were priestesses in Assyria, priestesses and high priestesses in Phoenicia, where they are shown by the feminine of Cohen. In the Manaean inscriptions, there was a feminine form of LW, priest, which some scholars would link with the Hebrew Louis. But Hebrew has no corresponding noun to Cohen or Louis. No women ever held a place among the Israelite clergy. I might add that according to Hebrew law, a woman had no right to money or property upon divorce, and since her vow was invalid, presumably she could not engage in business. Perhaps the most shocking laws of all were those that declared that a woman was to be stoned or burned to death for losing her virginity before marriage, a factor never before mentioned in other law codes of the Near East, and that upon being the victim of rape, a single woman was forced to marry the rapist. If she was already betrothed or married, she was to be stoned to death for having been raped. Perhaps the clearest explanation of the status of early Hebrew women was revealed by archaeologist D. Ushishkin in 1970. He described an ancient
I just want to stop there because that's actually biblical as well. In the Bible, Yahweh not only condones slavery, but condones a lot of rape. Just as like even marrying your rapist was a thing. So this is not foreign to me now. It would have been surprising to me before, especially when I was in the beginning stages of deconstructing Christianity, but I've deconstructed it enough to know that that's true. It doesn't surprise me that that is probably why they kept it in the New Age forms of the Bible, because they definitely had this, again, to usher. Christianity was big in ushering patriarchy. So this is not too far-fetched for me. It's definitely in the Bible as well. It's just, yeah, like, how did we fall from grace? We're going to continue to find out why, but I just wanted to touch on that. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. What the hell? While I get everything set up, let me just do a quick break.
Hey, you guys, it's your girl Dayna Patreace, aka the Black Fairy, and this is just a quick reminder to please like, share, comment, okay? Subscribe, click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any lives or new videos that I'm posting, and I promise to be posting more than ever now. And that is just a free way to help support me and support this channel, and it costs you nothing, okay? So without further ado, this quick reminder is now over. Thank you for watching.
Okay. So I don't know why the screen's not sharing. It's sharing, but oh, hold on. That's why. And actually, it's up here. Okay. Sorry about that, y'all. I'm not sure exactly what happened. I think I clicked something. Anyways, it doesn't matter. We're going to continue. It's continuing on forward from the recording point. I thought it was going to be stopped and I'd have to like make a second video and then edit them together, but it seems to be continuing. So we're going to continue. There's about 10, 11 minutes left. So yeah, we're almost through this chapter. Let's go.
Ancient Hebrew tomb recently unearthed in Israel in this way. Thus it seems that one body, almost certainly that of the husband, was placed higher than the body of the wife, so that the woman's inferior status was also demonstrated after her death. Despite the lowly position of women decreed by the Hebrew laws and customs, there were two incidents that reveal a possible revival of the ancient goddess religion, even within the royal house of Israel. Their association with the ancient beliefs suggests that two queens may have gained power through the ancient matrilineal customs, which had perhaps slipped back into Israel, along with other pagan patterns. Both incidents involved women who were listed as Hebrew queens, one in Israel and the other in Judah. The first concerns a woman known as Queen Maacah, possibly a descendant of an Aramean princess of the same name, who was in the harem of Hebrew king David. This second Maacah was listed in the Bible as the queen of Rehoboam, king of Israel from about 922 to 915 BC. His own mother was not Hebrew, but an Ammonite princess. This king is recorded as having erected pagan golden calves. Murray suggests that this same Queen Maacah was later the wife of the succeeding king, Abijam, who is listed as the son of Maacah and Rehoboam. Her suggestion is based upon the fact that some versions of the Bible list Maacah as the mother of Abijam's son, Asa. Other versions list Maacah as his grandmother, but place her name where the name of the mother would ordinarily be listed, and never mention who his mother was, a pattern quite unlike all other descriptions of royal Hebrew sons. Murray wrote, "The only way that Abijam and Asa could have had the same mother was by marriage of Abijam with his own mother. It was Asa who brought about many Hebrew reforms, suppressing the then very prevalent heathen practices, and who finally had Maacah dethroned. In light of the curious discrepancies in Asa's genealogy, the reason given in the Bible for the dethronement is all the more interesting. In 1 Kings chapter 15, verses 2 to 14, we read that Maacah had made an Asherah, that is, a statue of the goddess Asherah. Considering the repeated evidence of paganism during this period, it seems quite likely that Israel had taken up the religious customs of old, at that time accepting the female religion and the female kinship succession to the throne. If this was so, then Maacah would have been the royal heiress, and held this position until Asa, possibly under the influence of Hebrew priests, once again established the religion of Yahweh. The second incident is dated at about 842 BC, when Athaliah, daughter of Queen Jezebel, claimed the throne of Judah as her own. According to Hebrew law, women were not allowed to reign alone, yet it required a violent revolution to dethrone her. Jezebel herself was closely identified with the ancient religion. Jezebel's parents, Athaliah's grandparents, were the high priestess and priest of Ashtoreth and Baal in the Canaanite city of Sidon, reigning there as queen and king. The murder of Jezebel, who had reigned alongside Ahab as queen in the northern kingdom of Israel, was actually a political assault upon the religion of the goddess. This is made clear in the events that followed her murder in the biblical account in Kings 1 and 2. So it is worth noting that it was Jezebel's daughter who ascended to the royal throne of Judah, the only woman ever to rule the Hebrew nation alone. Most significant is the fact that once Athaliah secured her rights to the throne, she reigned for about 6 years, reestablishing the ancient pagan religion throughout the nation, much to the distress of the Hebrew priests.
I paused it here because Jezebel is another interesting story. You know, it even has a bad connotation, but I will be breaking down that biblical story as well, because it's not what it seems at all. And as you can see here, it's definitely not as it seems. We're going to get more into it. Just wanted to let y'all know that that's coming up. If you haven't already, subscribe, click the notification bell. I know that I haven't been able to be as consistent because I'm in school, and that kind of takes up a lot of my time, as well as being a mother and just life itself. But trust us, we're going to get into it. Now we are going to get into the end of it. We only have about 8 minutes left, and it's going to do a quick summary. And yeah, let's just continue because we're almost done. But Jezebel is another story that I think deserves some deconstruction. A lot has been inverted, a lot has been lies, a lot has been changed. And I'm happy to read this book and to just really be able to deconstruct my mind from some of the things that I grew up learning, right? But let's get into it.
Summary. Though cause and effect between matrilineal descent, high female status, and the veneration of the goddess are often confused, we cannot avoid the fact that repeated evidence attests that the religion of the goddess and a female kinship system were closely intertwined in many parts of the Near East. Though much of the material pertains to royalty, there is enough to suggest that matrilineal customs were practiced in many areas by the general population as well. In examining the transition from the goddess religion to the worship of the male deity as supreme and the subsequent effects upon the status of women, we find certain patterns emerging. From the beginning of the second millennium, the Assyrians were in close political and commercial contact with the Indo-European Hittites. Indo-European Hurrian princes appeared in various cities of northern Syria from that same time on. By 1600 BC, Babylon was controlled by the Indo-European-led Kassites. By 1500 BC, Assyria was completely under the control of the Hurrians, who had formed the kingdom of Mitanni. Accompanying these conquests was the introduction of the myth of Marduk, who, we are told, murdered the goddess to gain his supreme position in Babylon. In Assyria, the same myth was told, the name of Ashur simply substituted for the name of Marduk. Throughout the second millennium, the Indo-Europeans made further inroads into the lands of Canaan and Mesopotamia, and, as I shall explain in the next 2 chapters, may have played an important role in the formation of the Hebrew religion and laws. It may be helpful at this point to summarize the changes in the laws as they affected various aspects of the lives of women. In Eshnunna, in Sumer, at about 2000 BC, if a man raped a woman, he was put to death. In the old Babylonian period of Hammurabi, before the major incursions of the Indo-Europeans, though many of the northerners were in Babylonia even at that time, the same punishment was given. In the laws of Assyria, which are dated between 1450 and 1250 BC, when Assyria was under Indo-European control, we read that if a man rapes a woman, the husband or father of that woman should then rape the rapist's wife or daughter, and or marry his own daughter to the rapist. The last part of the law was also the law of the Hebrews, who added that a raped woman must be put to death if she was already married or betrothed. Assyrian laws appear to be the first to mention abortion, assigning the penalty as death. The reforms of Agena, about 2300 BC, refer to the fact that women used to take 2 husbands, though at the time of his reign, this was no longer allowed. In the laws of Eshnunna, a man who took a second wife after his first had given birth to a child was to be expelled from the house without any possessions. In Eshnunna, if a woman had a child by another man while her husband was away at war, her husband was expected to take her back as his wife. No punishment for adultery was mentioned. In Hammurabi's laws, if a woman related to another man sexually, she was expected to take an oath at the temple and return home to her husband. The Assyrian and Hebrew laws give the husband the right to murder both the wife and lover. It is somewhat difficult to make comparisons between the various places and periods, since the laws seem to have been included to codify very specific incidents and refer to varying situations. The major changes in the laws concerning women affected their right to engage in economic activities, what they might or might not inherit, what they in turn were allowed to pass on to their children, the attitude toward rape, abortion, infidelity on the part of the husband or wife, and among the Hebrews only, the penalty of death for women for the loss of virginity before marriage. These laws, since they primarily affected the economic and sexual activities of women, point to the likelihood that they were aimed at the matrilineal descent customs. The very fact that so many of the laws concerned women suggests that both the economic and sexual position of women was continually changing from the time of the first attested northern invasions, about 2300 BC, until the laws of the Hebrews, probably written down between 1250 and 1000 BC, though, as I mentioned, none of the original Hebrew texts have yet been discovered. In questioning to what extent the female kinship customs and the reverence of the female deity affected the status of women, we may perhaps best judge by our observations of the women of the Hebrew tribes, who had accepted the worship of the new male deity alone, and the subsequent laws controlling their position and rights in the society in which they lived. We might also want to consider the possibility that, in an even more personal way, just as the Hebrews prayed for sons and rejoiced when male heirs were born to carry on the family line, not so far removed from the attitudes of many families, even today. In matrilineal societies, the birth of daughters was likely to have been considered a special blessing. Female children may have been especially cherished for the same reasons. According to the curators of the Archaeological Museum of the University of Cambridge in England, even today, Among the matrilineal Asante in Africa, female children are especially valued because of their power to transmit blood, moja, to continue the matriline, abusia. In ancient times, the sun goddess of Arena in Anatolia was worshipped along with her 2 daughters and a granddaughter. The Cassis of Assam worshipped their goddess along with her 3 daughters and a wayward son. What emotional effects this may have had upon the self-esteem and development of a young girl at that time, we can only guess. A consciousness of the relationship of the veneration of the goddess to the matrilineal descent of name, property, and the rights to the throne is vital in understanding the suppression of the goddess religion. As I shall explain it, it was probably the underlying reason for the resentment of the worship of the goddess and all that it represented by the patriarchal invaders who arrived from the north. Judging by the continued presence of the goddess as supreme deity in the Neolithic and Chalcolithic societies of the Near and Middle East, goddess worship, probably accompanied by the matrilineal customs, appears to have existed without challenge for thousands of years. It is upon the appearance of the invading northerners, who from all accounts had established patrilineal, patriarchal customs and the worship of a supreme male deity, some time before their arrival in the goddess-worshipping areas, that the greatest changes in religious beliefs and social customs appear to have taken place. Who were these northern people, and how were they able to gradually suppress and eventually destroy the ancient goddess religion that had existed for so many thousands of years?
So that is the conclusion of chapter 3. I'm going to try to do at least a couple more chapters before I head back to school and then gradually release them so that there won't be, I mean, stuff happens. I'm in a fast-paced learning for my high school because I am back in school, as I stated. So sometimes I just get so busy with assignments and midterms because 4-month semester is packed into 2 months. So it takes time, but I definitely want to continue because I'm learning so much, and I'm sure you all as well. I was shocked at some of the things that I learned. Some of them I knew a little bit more about, and others kind of gave me an inkling to some interesting topics that we could talk about as we continue to deconstruct patriarchy together. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I love you. Thank you so much. Please comment. Let me know that you came through. Let me know your thoughts. Yeah. And we will talk soon. This video is almost like 2 hours now. So I'm just gonna leave it there and pick it up soon. So this will be probably dropping on the Saturday so that I can go through it, or Friday evening. But yeah, January 31st, February 1st, not sure. But either way, I'm going to get this out to you guys. Very interesting indeed. I, again, learned a lot. I have a lot to ponder on. I actually want to kind of go through it a little bit more again and make some notes for myself. But let me know if you guys would be interested in even doing like a live, just to maybe even review it together. Maybe there's some things that I missed, or maybe you guys have some ideas that you want to discuss. Whatever the case may be, I'm down. Let me know. I'll talk to y'all soon. And yeah. Stay tuned.
Yes. I fall in love with myself, and I want someone to share it with me. I want someone to share me with me.